those challenges, how we could change them as well, and frontally, what was the public's perception? Mr. President, from those conversations emerged an agenda for change, an agenda for transformation. That agenda included a 360 legislative review. So we had one group that was tasked to look across the public service, look across at the legislation that managed the public service, and then to see how we could, or what we needed to do in order, again, Mr. President, whether it is updating legislation, new legislation, whatever was needed. There was another group that was tasked to look at the issue of performance, look at the issue of incentives and discipline within the public service, things that we are not blind to. How could we improve on the current system of performance review and management? We're looking at the disciplinary conduct code that we had within government and said, how could we make it easier? We had instances, Mr. President, where we found that people were placed on leave for years and years and years without the matters being brought to bear. And then the issues of incentives as well. How do we incentivize behavior, Mr. President? There was another group as well looking at the structure of the public service. What do we need to do to change and to be able to right size? And even though sometimes we don't recognize it, a lot of the work that the government has been doing has come out of that agenda. So for instance, Mr. President, the work that is being done on the amalgamation under the Ministry of People's Empowerment is part of that restructuring and looking at inefficiencies and, again, how we can right size. Under the Ministry of the Leader of Government Business, the introduction of Business Barbados, again, how do we transform, deconstruct, and reconstruct new ways? BIDC as well, Export Barbados, BNECL, Mr. President, all of that coming out of that process of review, looking at the structures of the public service. Mr. President, recognizing as well that the work of transformation had to happen alongside the day-to-day work of ministries. We introduced director generals across the public service. We elevated mature in terms of length of service and expertise in particular areas, permanent secretaries to the role of director generals, and deployed them across the public service in key areas so that they can carry forward the transformation agenda while the permanent secretaries moved along with the day-to-day work. But as a flow-through between the permanent secretaries, between the transformation agenda that was happening, and those meetings, Mr. President, again, so that we can have teeth. All of this is part of what the government is doing within the public service to right-size the public service. And I'm not saying here today, Mr. President, that everything has gone accordingly or as fast as we would like it. If anybody recognizes that transformation takes time, and when you are dealing with transformation of a public service that has existed, Mr. President, based on a colonial system, that how we reshape that and reform that is not something that can be done easily or overnight. But the commitment of the government to make wrong things right and to right size, Mr. President, is evidence and it is bearing fruit. We came again to Parliament, Mr. President, in 2020 in a similar exercise, again for the appointment of public officers. At that time, Mr. President, we right-sized for over 6,000 public officers, Mr. President. Over 6,000 public officers. We came in as a government looked at the demotivation of the public sector, and again, said to ourselves that this had to be one of the fundamental things that we had to do for public officers in order to give them some surety, Mr. President, in order that public officers, like anybody else, can go before banking institutions with a letter, Mr. President, that ensures security and tenure, and say, look, treat me fairly, Mr. President. That is fundamentally what this is about, providing fairness. And we're here today to do it for another set of public officers, because this is part of an ongoing agenda, Mr. President. This is part of an ongoing agenda for the government of Barbados. And that agenda, Mr. President, like I said, is wide and it is deep. Because we are not just about fly-by-night changes, Mr. President. We want to make systemic changes that over time will become sustainable, which is why, as I said, we're looking at changes even in the legislative framework. Looking even at the Public Service Act that was done in 2007, and saying again, how do we make sure that we have a public service that again is going to be able to be fit for purpose going forward? A broad part of that as well is government digitization agenda, so that we can have a more responsive and more efficient public service. Right now, Mr. President, we have officers that are deployed across government agencies to digitize their records, Mr. President, so that they can be digitally accessible. We are no longer, Mr. President, writing on files. Since I've come in, Mr. President, to government, I've written on one file, one single file. My colleague, Senator Reid, says 0 for him. One single file. But there are those of us who still remember the days when you used to be passing files year high. And then you still can't find the files sometimes, because they got going these dusty annals and try to bring out these files, Mr. President. We are changing that, Mr. President. Part of that broad agenda, the agenda that we have online, Mr. President, through Easy Pay, all of that is government's broad attempt in terms of how we treat to the public service and how we treat to how the public also interface with the public service. But, Mr. President, we also have been treated to the direct, I would say, bread and butter issues of the public service and public officers as well. Because the broad agenda of transformation must also as well rebound to how people feel about their work, how people feel about themselves, to pride in terms of turning up for work and feeling that people value their work, Mr. President. We talked, Mr. President, previously in this honorable chamber about the investment the government has made in health. But we've done the same, Mr. President, in education. In 2023, the government established a post of school assistants, 220 of them, to be deployed across primary schools in order to assist teachers to be able to manage their classrooms better, Mr. President, and deliver more effective teacher training. We talked again, like I said, Mr. President, also as well, in the police department, Mr. President, the police service. And we will talk a little bit about some key things and key measures that we have done there. But across the public service, Mr. President, you would see changes that are happening. And the point fundamentally that I am making is that this is part of an overall agenda. This is not something that the government is doing willy-nilly. It is not something that the government is doing. It is very happy. I am sure all the public officers, the 2,095 of them, are going to be happy at this Christmas time that it's come here. But it is a process that has started. In the other place, the Honorable Prime Minister, when she introduced the bill, would have noted that as yet we have to have an overarching implementation of a human resource platform in order to make sure that, again, we can adequately and efficiently have all of the records of our public officers and all of the HR matters brought together in one place. In the absence of that, stymies sometimes the ability to very quickly be able to get the information. So it means going through records, some of those same files, Mr. President, that I talk about, then to try to see who got a matter here, how long they was working, all of those things, Mr. President. So it takes time. And like I said, this is not a process that started yesterday, last week, in order for us to introduce this constitutional amendment. But it was a task that we had to ask of the public service to be able to do in order to make sure that we had the correct information to be brought to this place. Mr. President, currently, the job evaluation and regrading exercise is being undertaken. The public service did not see a regrading exercise since 2007 under a Barbados Labour Party administration. And we have pledged and are undertaking it now, Mr. President, because we believe that you cannot take a piecemeal approach, because we understand that there are some posts and positions, Mr. President, within the public service that are uncompetitive. We can't get people to take up the jobs because the salaries, Mr. President, are too low. But we don't want to pick and choose and here and there. So we said we are embracing a comprehensive regrading exercise. Because one, not done since 2007. And we are doing it, Mr. President, again, to imbue a sense of fairness into the treatment and positioning of public officers, Mr. President. That agenda has also as well been buttressed by the fact that this government, in the midst, and I want to say it, Mr. President, because it is important to understand fundamentally that we have not done so. We have not done this transformation agenda. We have not done looking at how we move and reform the public service, how we treat to the bread and butter issues, including, Mr. President, the introduction of 3 wage increases in the public sector, where none were given previously, Mr. President. Between the period of 2009, Mr. President, and 2017, Mr. President, not a single wage increase. This government has given a one-off payment of $1,500 and 3 wage increases. 3% 2023, 3% 2024, 3% 2025. And we have done so, Mr. President, because we are intent on being the government that hears, feels, and sees people. Hears, sees, and feels people. So while others like to wax poetic about how we treat the Barbadians, Mr. President, this administration is intent on doing the work, on doing the fundamental work, on repairing for the public service all that was taken from them and making sure that they can be treated fairly and feel valued in their work. So we've done that, and we are set, Mr. President, for the period of 2025-2026 to also as well enter into negotiations as well. Looking forward, Mr. President, to another wage increase. This government, this Barbados Labour Party administration. So, Mr. President, we had those years where the public service did not see that wage increase, did not see a regrading exercise. Mr. President, we had a period in which the public service, in which, for instance, the police service were told we could not build you any new stations because of the economic situation. We could not do major improvements because of the economic situation. In which this government, under an IMF structural program, not one, but two, gave wage increases. Three, in the midst of a structural adjustment process, as we did with the reintroduction of free tertiary education, Mr. President. So that our record for how we treat to elevating the status of the public service, Mr. President, cannot be denied. Mr. President, I want to point to the work now that we've done specifically for the police service. We introduced a criminal investigation allowance which became effective April 1st, 2024. And that criminal investigation allowance, Mr. President, provided for the fact that we understood that detectives in particular carried out a level of task, dangerous, Mr. President, long hours, that needed to be rewarded. This government introduced that in 2024. The post, Mr. President, of senior constable was created with just under 300 persons being appointed, Mr. President. 300 persons being appointed for senior constable. Recognizing that we had people as constable working for 20 years or over, or so, Mr. President. And we wanted to be able to elevate them, that they could bring their experience to bear in the service and have the requisite elevation. And those persons, Mr. President, were recently appointed. We also, as well, had the appointment of over 46 special constables with 3 years or more. Some with over 10 years, Mr. President, working as special constables, being made police constables, Mr. President. Being made police constables, Mr. President. Mr. President, I want to mention under the national minimum wage that we increase wages for island constables and watchmen, Mr. President. They had a substantive increase per day of $19.56, Mr. President, per session. A substantive increase, Mr. President. And all of this done within the context of a constrained environment, done within the context of a social environment, Mr. President, that we have to be able to deal with. All of this done within the context of a program for reform and transformation. But the government intends that we will be able to run on multiple tracks at the same time, but we were also not stepping back from the fundamental responsibilities that we had. In this instance, I have mentioned to the police service, but then as well across the broader public service, Mr. President. So that this bill, as I said, reinforces that commitment to the part of government to make sure that we have public officers who are rightly entitled, Mr. President, under the Public Service Act, as I noted, to be appointed. Mr. President, as we continue to right-size the HR processes within the public service, we hope then that we will see that these numbers diminish over time, because we will then have the proper processes in place for the appointments as needed, Mr. President. Mr. President, part as well of that reform agenda that we are doing is not only just to appoint people, because some people will say you appoint people in the public service, no need to do better. But we've also instituted a training program and strengthened it, Mr. President, within the public service. So that currently there is a portal that is available to public officers, that they can go and have training across the public service, Mr. President. Officers in various departments that work across issues that are alike, Mr. President, can meet and discuss issues. So if they're working on social policy issues, even though they may come from different departments or different ministries, that they can come together and talk to one another about the issues and challenges. We've also said as well, we want them to be able to write, Mr. President, to be able to write as public officers. So that the appointment framework rests also within a system in which we are attempting to make sure that we also build a stronger level of capacity within the public service for execution. We have the commitment for results framework that is also about making sure that we can have a public service that is focused on objectives, Mr. President. And we introduced that over a period of 3 years. And it required intensive training, Mr. President. It required intensive dialogue for public officers to be focused on objectives and indicators and outputs, a process that we are still going through, Mr. President. But now it is aligned to our budget process. It is now aligned to our budget process in order to make sure that when departments come to estimates, that they are coming with their budgets aligned to core purpose, Mr. President, that their budgets are aligned to core purpose. So that, Mr. President, this amendment, yes, Mr. President, is specifically about those 2,095 officers, 2,095 public officers. But like I said, it rests within a broader frame. But Mr. President, I also want to note that Section 6 of the bill notes that there will be some persons that will be ineligible for appointment under Section 5. And Mr. President, I read from the bill, a person shall not be eligible for appointment to an office under Section 5, where the person is the subject of a disciplinary matter commenced pursuant to the provisions of the Public Service Act, Cap 29, or any other relevant enactment, is the subject of an ongoing criminal matter, was convicted of an offense and his conviction has not been expunged from his criminal record, has been on medical leave for a period of at least 3 months, cumulatively in any one calendar year, and has had his case processed with the Director General for referral to the medical officer or medical board, has in his personal records a negative report or report of conduct which contravenes the Public Service Act, Cap 29. But as well, Mr. President, that we have these caveats. I want to note that the process also as well includes a process for appeals, where people feel that they might have been unfairly left out. There is, Mr. President, a right of appeal to His Excellency the President for a hearing to ensure that their matter can be reviewed. In 2020, when we did this exercise, there were over 628 applications for such an appeal. And of those, 417, Mr. President, 417 were accepted, adding to the number of public officers then who will be eligible to be appointed. So we have a process that works, and by putting that process in the office of the President, imbuing confidence and independence, Mr. President, in that review process. So So the process works. People do not have to worry that they are going to be unfaired, Mr. President. You might have been left out again because the system has to work. We may have some anomalies there. Your record might have been expunged, Mr. President, and we might not have reflected it. All of that within the context of the review process that you have available, we can then be able to redress, Mr. President, any of those instances. Mr. President, as I close and as I commend this bill to this House, I want to note, Mr. President, and I hope that we would have consensus this morning. I hope that we would have consensus this morning, as I said, that this fundamentally, for public officers is about fairness. That this fundamentally is about people like my aunts who've worked in the public service, and your cousins, Mr. President, family, and the next door neighbors who work in the public service can now have that sense of confidence that they didn't used to have before, Mr. President. That they can go and feel that they can sit down in a bank manager's office, Mr. President, with a letter that provides them with the level of security and surety, Mr. President, that is needed. And Mr. President, that is what this government is seeking to do. Fairness, confidence, recognition, and valuing of the public service. With those words, Mr. President, I'm obliged and beg that this bill be read a second time.
Thank you, Senator Dr. Mulroney. Senator Andre Worrell.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning to all colleagues in the Senate. I know that we are eager to get on with the festivities of the season and, sharing the tidings of joy and peace for the Christmas holidays. But we have the work of the country to do, and I rise in joining this debate on the appointment of civil servants who have been within the profession or working in for 3 years, appointments and promotion, who have been working for 3 years or more. Mr. President, this debate gives us a good opportunity, especially at the end of the year, and we often make plans for future development as to how we would love to see things change, improve, and become better. And it gives us an opportunity to speak generally about the civil service of Barbados, which has served us well over the years. But obviously, there can be some improvement, there can be some change, and we would hope, and that improvement and change would be necessary for the continued development of the country. So, while supporting the bill, this is not the first time that a bill of this nature has come before the Parliament in either administration, but even though there are provisions within the civil service that should make these appointments automatic, and we need to get to that stage within the civil service where these appointments become automatic, and these legislation should not have to come to Parliament for debate to make it seem as though any one particular administration is favoring or granting favor to civil servants. Because within the general orders, there are generally rules as to the appointment of civil servants, and we need to get to the stage where we follow and adhere to those rules. There are also rules as to the acting appointment of civil servants and the promotion process as well. And while we are here dealing with that, we have to look at some of the challenges which many civil servants face and which our public service face in general in Barbados. And those challenges can be broken down probably into 5 areas. We have human resources and staffing issues. We have compensation and benefit and industrial relation issues. issues with management, governance, and accountability. And in that, we see the possibility for political interference as well and poor accountability. We also have training issues and capacity skill gaps within the civil service, which need to be addressed and looked at. And we also have the bureaucracy and service delivery problems, which many Barbadians complain about on a daily basis. The time that it takes to renew a driver's license, the time that it takes to whether or not you have to go to the Barbados Licensing Authority to pay or to have your vehicle registration updated once you've paid your insurance. For many Barbadians, there have been that misunderstanding over the years because at one point you were told once your insurance is paid, the vehicle registration is taken care of and you don't have to do it. Then at the next end of it, you are told, well, you still have to go to licensing authority and update the vehicle registration because you may be driving around and see someone with your registration number, even though you have paid your insurance and all of those things, but your is not up to date. This ties into the issues with technology and modernization challenges. Unfortunately for this current administration, I have no hope, and I don't buy into any of the technology advantages which they buy into. And I would give a classic example. For years, I have been renewing my driver's license using the Easy Pay service. Then I was told from this year that is no longer available, which resulted in me having to travel to the licensing authority to renew the driver's license. And after that, you couldn't even get your driver's license card updated there. I went to Old Town, you have to go to the Pine. So I have no hope in any of the technological advances brought by this government because one, they've been proven not to work. Two, they have been proven to be exposed to hacking. And three, well, they generally are a complete waste of time and do not improve the efficiency of the civil service. And you know who gets the blame for all of this? The civil servant who sits at the counter as the cashier or as the clerk who has to process the application that the member of the public is dealing with, and the member of the public who has to either take a day off from work, have to ask for extended time during their lunch hour just to get simple things done which could have been done online and which the government promised in their modernization that they would be able to offer the people of Barbados a digital economy where things are more easily done online. Mr. President, you also have issues with legislative and structural restraints, health and safety, and a number of key areas. So I want to spend some time, Mr. President, speaking about some of these issues today as we discuss the appointment and promotion of over 2,000 civil servants who have worked within the civil service for over 3 years and who have qualified for that appointment or promotion. First, Mr. President, I want to look at the area of the public service crisis. And the failing is not because the public servants are lazy. It is a struggle because leadership has failed to modernize, plan, and respect the institution. For years, Barbados has had a very efficient public service with well-trained civil servants with years and years of experience. And we have found over time that there has been a loss of that experience to the public service. One of the reasons for that loss would be brain drain in terms of persons seeking opportunities elsewhere outside of Barbados because of the opportunity to earn better salaries. Now, if we want to continue to boast of a public service that does well towards and contributes towards the development of this country, we need to recognize that you have to reward and pay public servants the salary that they believe that they that matches the work which they're doing. Otherwise, we will continue to face that problem in terms of losing experienced civil servants and losing persons from the public service who are well qualified and trained. And we do spend a lot of money within the civil service to train and qualify persons. We've lost persons as well because of changes to the pension age, so that with the upcoming changes to the pension arrangement, senior civil servants took the opportunity to jump ship instead of having to work additional years beyond the time period in which they had planned to work. So because of that, we've lost a lot of top-level civil servants with experience. And we are and as a result of that, the junior level civil servants, or the persons who have replaced them, benefit from the knowledge and the experience which existed within the civil service. And I'm talking about persons who work as executive secretaries for ministers, who would be able to know how the process works in terms of being able to guide a new minister or civil servant as they come into a ministry. Persons within cabinet office to the level of maybe not the cabinet secretary, but the senior administrative officers or deputy permanent secretaries who would provide good counsel. We have lost some of those persons over the years, so that a lot of the technical knowledge within how the government is run, the protocols, have been lost and not easily replaced. So we need to find a way of maintaining those persons within the civil service and having a succession plan in place that the younger persons will be able to quickly learn from their experience and have that transfer of knowledge. Even when you go to professional areas such as nursing and medical professional as well, we have a lot of nurses who have left Barbados because they're quite frankly not satisfied with the level of pay which a nurse receives here in Barbados who is fully qualified. And you can look at going to places such as Bermuda, Cayman Islands, the US or the UK, and you are paid twice the amount that you would work for here in Barbados. So obviously they will jump at those opportunities, and then they're finding it difficult to be promoted. And for specialists as well, who spent years in terms of developing a specialty, being trained by the government, but because of the bureaucracy within the service, at the hospital, within the polyclinic setting, or within the health service setting, choose, you know what, I value my life over this frustration, and for peace of mind, they may choose to either go out into private practice, or they may even leave Barbados as a result of that. If you go through the health service in Barbados, there are a number of consultants which we do not have at our disposal. And we have to rely on consultants which travel across the region to provide service to the people of Barbados. These are things that we need to proactively address as we go forward and take some firm decisions that money may be better spent to pay persons an adequate salary, and also to have the conditions of service which would keep persons within the service, because we need them and we need their experience. I also would look at transfer and promotions and the way how we deploy persons. A number of young people and opportunities for younger persons. A number of young people in Barbados today are crying out that they're not being hired because a couple weeks ago, no, just last week, I believe it was, you saw a number of the real estate construction persons making an argument that they found it difficult to find skilled laborers here in Barbados. I took the time to check the website of one of those construction companies, and for a job of a plumber, they required a plumber with 4 to 5 years experience. Now, I know that just in that same week, there were a number of young persons in Barbados who graduated from the Samuel Jackman Prescott Institute of Technology with qualifications in plumbing. In fact, one of them, after I posted the article, asked if I can source the contact information for the HR manager for these construction companies who claim that they can't find skilled laborers here in Barbados. And I did share the information with them. But they're looking for plumbers with 4 to 5 years experience. Now, that is an issue because obviously a person who's now graduating will not have 4 to 5 years experience. But how much work are you doing in terms of bringing on persons to train them or taking the opportunities to train them? Because a lot of our experienced plumbers in Barbados learn through apprenticeship. They worked with a senior plumber or electrician, and they got their qualifications through apprenticeship. So why are we not offering that opportunity for our young people? Coming back to this debate, Mr. President, I'm saying that the government needs to open up its doors to more young people in terms of apprenticeship opportunities and that first employment opportunity in the civil service. Many of our senior professionals in Barbados, be they doctors, be they lawyers, be they accountants, be they engineers or civil servants, many of them benefited from having their first job in the civil service, either as a teacher, either as a clerical officer, and then through their job in the civil service, they were able to put themselves through university and get the professional qualification in law, in medicine, in engineering, or in accounting. And then they went off, either returned to the civil service in a senior position, or they went into private practice, or worked for the private sector. We need to return to those days in Barbados where young people see as a first opportunity the opportunity to work within the civil service and get that valuable experience. Because wherever you see a job advertised in Barbados, they're asking for 3 or 4 years experience. And you can't have 3 or 4 years experience when you have just graduated from university, when you have just left secondary school in those areas. So we need to do more as a civil service, as a government, to ensure that we give our young people opportunities, because many of us have benefited from that opportunity. Then there's also the other aspect of it in terms of right now the police service is doing a massive recruitment drive in Barbados. And you also have within the police service the challenge of you have persons who've been within the police service for over 20 years who still remain at the rank of a constable. We need to have greater transfer. We need to have greater transfer of civil servants between departments as was done before. And I know of this because my father, many moons ago, started as a police officer. And then he was able to transfer to the immigration department. And that is the job that he had until he died. And these are the things that we need to do as a way of, because you cannot promote every single constable within the police service, but can we promote them by allowing them to more freely move around the civil service? And there is a procedure there for that as well, where you can have persons moving into the probation department, you can have persons moving into the welfare department, the immigration and customs. And I do believe, Mr. President, that these are areas that we must focus on more as a government in allowing persons who have gone through the police service, the Barbados Defense Force, to more easily transition to other areas within the civil service and take the knowledge and the experience with them. I do have a challenge in one area when it comes to customs. Now, the role of a customs officer is a very critical role. And I believe that the individuals who perform those duties should have the necessary knowledge and experience. And if we had integrity legislation in place with the Commission, I believe that one of the recommendations would be that customs officers who perform certain duties in terms of assessing the duties to be paid, the duties to be collected, searching, doing the search of a container when it goes off property and is being opened at a facility off of customs, at a private facility, that they should be at a certain level and possibly with a certain age and experience. And this is where, if you had that transfer process between departments such as immigration, the defense force, those persons moving into these areas in customs, it would help to reduce some of the possibility of any bad behavior, more or less, happening in areas such as customs. So I believe that these are things that we need to look at as well, Mr. President, as we go through the legislation. Now, coming back to the public service crisis, Barbadians experience long lines and delays and efficiency not because the officers do not care, but because the system is outdated and understaffed and poorly managed. This is an area that we need to recognize, that even within the hospital, an accident and emergency, one of the reasons for the delays that Barbadians recognize is because it is understaffed. And when you go to different government departments and those long lines that you have, a matter that you should be comfortably able to deal with within a lunch hour takes you 3 hours, it's because they're understaffed. When you send in, when a citizen makes a request to the welfare department for assistance, the length of time it takes for the welfare officer to make an appointment to visit that person is because they're understaffed. And you have one welfare officer that may have to service an entire parish or constituency and may be receiving 100 or more applications a week and simply does not have the amount of time in a day to get back to those applications. So we need to deal with the understaffing issues within the various agencies. And we cannot just always look at how much money the Treasury is saving by not having an individual assigned to that particular post. As a result of that, we have a demoralized public service, which cannot deliver first-class service, and morale today is at one of its lowest points in recent history. So even though we are granting these appointments, we also need to look at the morale within the civil service. Now, Mr. President, there's the troubling issue of the acting appointments having become a permanent feature of the public service, and it denies officers the stability, fair pay, and career certainty. You have a number of persons who are acting within the public service, especially within the teaching service, who have been acting for 3 or 4 years, and some persons even retire from the service and have not been paid their acting allowances. These things need to be rectified, and because when an individual takes on the responsibility to act in a senior position and they do not get the pay commensurate with that role, they take on additional duties helping out the school, the ministry, or the department. And for that person to be in that position for over a year and don't see an increase in the acting allowance within their paycheck, it becomes a bother for that individual. It becomes a burden for that individual because here you are, you're doing the additional work, you're extending the additional time, but you're not receiving the monetary or financial reward for it. And then in some situations, it is even so painful that the individual may return from sick leave, study leave, and vacation, and you still do not get promoted into that position. You are put back into your substantive post. These are things which we need to address, which are not fair to persons within the civil service. We also have the pay, conditions, and industrial relations issue. Now, public servants are being asked to do more with less. while their real wages are being eaten away by inflation and rising costs of living. These are issues which need to be addressed. We need to properly pay our public servants and recognize that the cost of living is eroding all of the pay that they are getting, so that the public service was a slower track to becoming middle class. But now you have many public servants who may seem as though they are part of the working poor within the population. So we need to look at outstanding overtime, acting pay, and allowances are not accounting errors, but they are a result of broken promises, Mr. President. Going back to the governance issues, management and accountability. Now, many years, in every Auditor General report, the Auditor General flags issues within the civil service. So year after year, the Auditor General flags weak controls and poor financial management, yet there are no consequences. We also need to send a message to our civil servants as well that you are not just in the service to be promoted, but you need to have a proper performance management culture and system within the service as well, and accountability within the system. So to whom much is given, much is expected. So and if you meet all of their conditions of service, you must expect delivery of that service as well. So therefore, we should see reduced incidents of the Auditor General reporting of practices within the civil service which does not meet the financial rules, and it shows a wastage not only in funds but of time for projects to be done within the civil service. Classic example in terms, you don't really see it too often, but the length of time it would take MTW to repair a road, or the time between a downpour of rain and the time that the workers from the MTW depots get to fill the potholes. Because all know, rain fell mid-November, a lot of the potholes are still exposed and causing havoc for the drivers in Barbados. We need to have greater efficiency within the service. With regard to service delivery, Barbadians are tired of hearing "come back next week" from a public servant trapped in an outdated procedure. When it takes months to get a permit, pension, or approval, that is not efficiency. That is institutional failure. And I want to speak a little bit with regard to pension. Now, as a result of COVID, Mr. President, there are a number of housewives who would have lost their husbands or maybe during COVID. And some of these persons may not have left a pension benefit, but are entitled to pension from the civil service. For example, if the person would have served as a police years ago in the 1970s and 80s and would have put in the 10 years, that individual will still be entitled to a pension from the Treasury. And you have a number of persons who have been trying to apply for that pension because of the need. And they're not able to get back a response from the service in terms of that pension. Because the issue is that a civil servant would have to look for the paper file, for the paper file, Mr. President, and that file may be stored away in a box from the 1970s or 80s, and it takes time for the civil servant to actually locate the record for that individual. And all of this time, the housewife, who may never have worked because she was a housewife for all of those years, are finding it difficult to make ends meet and not being able to benefit from the pension which the husband would have been entitled to. We need to recognize that at the end of these applications is a hurting family. and a family in need, and do whatever we must in order to speed up that process so that the family can get the necessary assistance which they're entitled to. And that is an issue which a number of persons face who would have put in the 10 years requirement in the civil service in the period of time which they will qualify, and then may have moved on to a private sector and who are not benefiting from that civil service pension that they're entitled to. So these are things that we must adhere to and we must do better in rectifying. Now, technology and modernization, Mr. President. In 2025, a paper-based public service is not just inefficient, it is unacceptable. Digital government cannot be a press release. It must be a functioning reality across ministries. Modernization without training is setting public servants up to fail. This government has tried and they've tampered with a number of digital innovations within this country. And unfortunately, they have not really worked out, and then the public servants end up being the ones who take the brunt of the blame and the fallout. From 2018, this government promised digitization of the records at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Up to a couple days ago, I heard Senator Connell mention that in his maiden speech as one of the issues resulting in the delays within treatment of patients within the civil service, and the delays within accident and emergency and the various outpatient clinics. We need to move faster in becoming digital, and not just say that we are digital, but then you cannot take the digital copy to your insurance agent as proof of payment and proof that you do have the particular service or license to operate, Mr. President. We need to get our acts together. Don't tell us to renew in one place and then go someplace else to pay, or renew in one place, pay in another place, and then go someplace else to collect the official document or have the official document updated. Have some respect for the time of Barbadians. We don't have the time to be running around. It impacts productivity. We don't have the time to be running around to various government offices during the day. We honestly don't have that time. And coming to time as well, the government had a good thing going during COVID in terms of the flexi time and allowing some civil servants to work from home. We would be glad for, some of us in private Barbados would be glad for that to happen again, because one, when the civil servants worked from home, I believe that we had less traffic on the road. Many of us experienced traffic delays coming here today, Mr. President. And now, Mr. President, we've come to a stage in Barbados where you can no longer go out, conduct your business, get back home in time to do a little bit more business and maybe go out again. You have to time your departure and recognize that you can only do it once a day, because it's not, even if you get off the road by 2 o'clock, you're in traffic. So I'm believing that the civil service could benefit, and the government should lead by example, because a lot of the private sector offices are still doing it, allowing their employees to work at least 2 or 3 days a week from at home. And they're getting the work done. The civil service can lead by example and allow more workers to work from at home, get the job done, stay off of the road, and have a little bit more time for themselves as well. Because at the end of the day, the work is still being done, and you'll find that you spend more time working if you don't have to get up at 5:30 in the morning, stay in rush hour traffic for an hour to get to your desk for 8 o'clock. You're already tired, and you're already frustrated, and then you still have to take a half an hour to catch yourself. Whereas you could have gotten up at 6 o'clock, push off an hour or 2 hours of work from in your living room, and continue with the day, and you'll find that there might be a higher turnover of work and files being completed within the civil service and increase in productivity as well. You just need to have the management structures in place to properly manage the process, Mr. President. Now, I believe that through the work of the Democratic Labour Party, while in office, we did improve a lot of the working conditions for civil servants with the building of the office spaces in Warrens. But there's still some improvement that needs to be done, especially within the schools, because every week a school closes as a result of environmental issues. So you cannot demand professionalism from public servants while housing them in dilapidated buildings with inadequate equipment. So we need to do what we must in order to improve the conditions in our schools. It's not only a burden for the children, the students, but also for the civil servants who have to work in those environments as well. And burnout in frontline services is real, and ignoring it threatens both workers and the public they serve. You need to recognize that, Mr. President. Now, in going forward, Mr. President, while we support the promotion and appointment of the civil servants, we also need to get our act together as a government, not BLP, DLP government, but the way how the entire civil service is ran, so that it becomes more efficient and more effective, that it becomes a rite of passage. There's one other issue, Mr. President, I need to address before I sit. Now, merit-based recruitment and promotion systems within the civil service. There's an issue that Barbadians are facing right now in trying to get a job within the civil service. They're often told you need to have a referral letter or a reference letter from a member of parliament. I think that those days need to come to an end within the civil service. After the election period, the parliamentarian services every single individual in the country. The civil service is for all Barbadians. And to have to require a reference letter from a politician,
Mr. President?
I'm what you rise.
I rise in a point of order. There's no requirement within the public service, within its act, within any process or policy within the public service that requires any individual to bring a reference letter from a politician in order to gain a thing. And to do so and to say so is to really be casting aspersions on the public service itself.
Thank you very much. Please continue, Senator Vargo.
Mr. President, is there a point of order, or can I continue on the same?
Yes, the minister pointed out that in the Public Service Act and regulations and administrative, then there's no such requirement. But you can continue to make your point.
Thank you, Mr. President. Even though that may be the case, there is a growing custom, especially since 2018, Mr. President, if an individual wants to get a job at the Water Authority, if an individual wants to get a job at Sanitation Service Authority, if an individual wants to get a job at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, if it is not within the legislation, I think it must be made clear to the persons doing the hiring not to ask persons for these letters, because persons have been asking for these letters. They go to take in their applications and they're being told that they need to have a referral letter from a member of parliament. What I'm saying, Mr. President, it ought not to be happening. The referral letter that the individual might need could be the ones that you will customarily get from your teacher at secondary school, or your teacher, or from a member of the clergy, the church that you attend, or from a manager that you worked with in the past, or from a member of the community of high standing who could offer a character reference for you. Mr. President, we seem to have reached a stage where these applications are only taken seriously if they come along with a referral letter from an MP. And I'm saying, Mr. President, that needs to stop in this country. And we cannot have a politicalization of the civil service. When persons receive a job as a civil servant, doesn't matter which administration you were hired under. Before, we used to say your responsibility is to the crown, but now as a republic, we will say that your responsibility is to the state. And you do your job to benefit the state, regardless of who would have hired you. You also have another issue with that same practice, because when it comes to disciplining some persons, they would actually say to the manager, I was hired by XYZ minister, so you can't tell me anything. These things need to come to an end within the civil service, and persons need to recognize that you are doing a job for the state of Barbados and to the benefit of all Barbadians, Mr. President. And regardless of who you are, which constituency you are from, who you voted for, it does not matter. Once you get that job, your responsibility is to the people of Barbados to deliver an honest day's work for an honest day's pay to the people of Barbados, not to any individual or not to any political party, Mr. President. And Mr. President, I believe that we've made ourselves clear that we need to take the opportunity to definitely modernize the civil service, not just promise it. And we also need to respect the conditions and services under which the individuals work. And we need to get to a stage where the process of appointment and promotion and pay as well are dealt with in a speedy way, that you don't have to come back to Parliament every 3 years or just before a general election to pass legislation to appoint persons, Mr. President. These things are already entrenched within the general orders as to how these appointments and promotions are dealt with. You need to pay their acting allowances, and we need to look at a succession plan within the civil service to ensure that the efficiency and the work of the civil service is continued. With those few words, I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Worrell. Are there any other speakers? Senator Reverend Morris.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before I go into the meat of my matters, let me, first of all, thank Senator Drakes for her contributions in the Senate. I think that I have learned personally a lot from her, and she's on to other areas, so I want to thank her and for her friendship as well. I also want to welcome back Honorable Senator Monique Tate, but we still have her. We have her again, and I appreciate that very much. At the same time, I want to, since this is the first time I'm speaking since the Honorable Senator Dr. Kenneth Connell came, I would like to, on my own person, I have to welcome you, sir. I look forward to your contributions. I'm no medic, but I will listen for some of the advice that you give here so that I can go and get some attention free of cost. But we do welcome, and I look forward to working with you in the Senate. Sir, I also wanted to welcome back Senator Walters, because I had not seen him for a long time, and I wanted to welcome him back again, but he's not in his seat today, so I will reserve that welcome for another time. I said wanted to. Sir, you may doubt me, but I believe that I agree with a lot of things that the opposition leader, or the Honorable Senator for leading opposition business in this Senate. I agree with a lot of things there. But it's only a matter, sir, of saying, physician, heal thyself. That's a quote from the Bible, sir. I also want to support the matter before this Senate because of my own experiences in the teaching service and the experiences of a number of persons in the teaching service. The Honorable Senator mentioned the teaching service. And as also a former member, in fact, the first vice president of the Barbados Secondary Teachers Union, because we would have had to deal with a lot of issues that are before us now. Sir, at the abolition, and you know I'm going to take an historical approach, sir. At the abolition of the slave system in the Caribbean, there was always a problem with tenure. And in fact, there was an issue of uncertainty of tenure. Uncertainty of tenure about land, uncertainty about employment. A lot of persons, sir, were employed at the whims and fancies of the employer, and therefore there was no certainty in employment. They were tied to the plantation, we know that. And so much so that they could not work anyplace else, because if you were living on the tenantries, you had to go to the plantation to work. And that created a problem. Then there was the Masters and Servants Act, which created further problems for our people. Over the years, those problems were reduced. But we have had problems too in this public service. And from my perspective as a unionista and as a person that was personally involved, those problems stem from a lack of accountability and transparency by some individuals with responsibility for administration. Some. Because we in the union at one time believed that some of these actions were deliberate. And let us deal first of all, sir, with the Ministry of Education. The Honorable Opposition Senator referred to this. Yes, there was confusion. There was a matter of qualifications. But may I point out to you, sir, that in one fell swoop, the qualifications for principals and senior positions were changed immediately in 2016, without giving those persons who did not reach the requisite levels, without giving them a chance to obtain the qualifications. I am talking about the change of qualifications for principals and deputy principals. Immediately, sir, within 1 weekend, that was done. And what happened in the teaching service is that it caused a lot of confusion, because persons who were experienced, sir, but who did not have their master's degree, were automatically booted out. And when I say booted out, in other words, not required to apply for such positions. That's the first thing. So the experienced people who could manage schools were not even given the chance to get qualifications, or to, I should say, correct English, obtain qualifications. And mark you, this process occurred before in the 1970s, late 1970s, and the 1980s, when they wanted to improve the qualifications of persons in teaching, and the government then allowed the persons to be qualified, or to reach the level of qualifications necessary for their positions. Sir, we are also aware that there was a time in 2016, between 2016 and 2017, just before the election, a number of public servants were ushered to Barbados Community College and received their appointment letters. Lest we forget, Sir, I was in a situation where a lady acted as a senior teacher for years, only not to be appointed, and a younger person was appointed, and that person left the teaching service soon after, because we're always overlooked. But there's sometimes I want to draw, sir, from my own personal experience. I left this country in 2018 to represent this country as a diplomat in London. A person, the most senior person in the Department of History at the school, was, I can't say appointed, was acting in the position of head of the Department of History. So do you know when that person received any compensation for acting? Last year. Since 2018. I do not want to blame anybody, but I want to say that every time representation was made to the public service, they were told, we never received these things. We never received the next. And that is why I say, I've said, and I'm going to say it here now, that I believe secretary treasurers in the schools in Barbados should be brought into the general service, not the employees of boards of management. They should be brought in to the general service. What else, sir? That you cannot expect people to be in an acting position and then 5 or 6 years later, they receive their compensation and even going against advice not to pay the persons all the money one time, they still did it. So the person ended up losing. Sir, we have a situation now in our schools where we are reaping the seeds that were sown earlier. I want to, and I'm not going to speak too long on this, but I want to refer to my own situation. Because, sir, that is something that hurt me. I acted as head of the Department of History for 4 years on the retirement of the person in the substantive post. I acted, sir, for 4 years. And I want to tell you my story because, sir, I believe in telling my story because I'm supporting this bill because I don't ever want any person to go through this again. I acted in that position for 4 years. When the person from the substantive post retired, I acted. And then the time for appointment had come, 4 years later. And that appointment was supposed to take place in the 2008-2009 school academic year. I was told to come to an interview. And I went to attend the interview. There were 2 others there. As a matter of fact, I was warned, sir, the morning before the interview, I was warned that there was another person who was coming for the position. And I went to that interview. There were 2 persons who were interviewed before me. And those persons, a combination of time in the interview, sir, was about 25 minutes. Sir, my interview lasted for 2.5 hours. And I was grilled. Even though I went to assembly every day and kept students quiet until the principal came into the hall. The first question was asked, will you be going to assembly? I said, yes. I was asked about infusion of technology in the classroom, which I said we're already doing. Furthermore, sir, At that time, I was the deputy chief examiner for advanced level history in the Caribbean. But you know, sir, after the grilling, I had to end the interview because I was asked by your board in 2009, how do you feel becoming head of the department at this school when you did not go to one of these schools? That didn't happen under any BLP government, sir. And he ended the debate then, the interview then, and said, this is discriminatory. And I said, sir, Mr. Chairman, even I know that I am more intelligent than the person who asked me that question. That I was not recommended for the job. I was not recommended for the position. And it caused chaos at the school itself. This is my story. That is my story, sir. Because I did not go to one of these schools. And, sir, it caused chaos, not me. It caused chaos. I just said that because I'm hearing their side, sir, but that doesn't refer to you. But it caused chaos because the next academic year began without a head of department. And the reason why it caused chaos, because it was not accepted by the Ministry of Education. And I saw that same thing happen recently as well. That was not it, sir. That is not all. When we talk about accountability, and I can only speak from a perspective of the school. When we talk about accountability, that's what I'm saying. We need to bring the secretary treasurers. There's some good ones, you know, there's some good ones. But we need to bring all of them under the public service. So I came back here in 23, to talk about retirement. I submitted my letters, all the documents and all the forms, weeks after it had not left the school. I called, I tried to find out what happened. Oh, the papers have gone down. When I checked, they have not gone. This continued into months, sir, until I asked what has happened. I went to the school many times to find out what has happened. And I was told, oh, the papers are sorted out. Oh, we'll fill up these and we will send them down on Monday. I filled about 3 sets of forms, sir. And then one day I received a call. Oh, that was even before. Reverend Morris, oh, you retired since 2018. We sent you the form since 2018. I said, but sir, I could not have retired. I never filled out any forms. Never filled out any forms. How could I have somebody retire? Okay, but look, it is here. You retire. I said, I did not sign anything. Then I was told the problem was at the office of Treasury and blaming the persons, not knowing that that person, they grew up together and like that, you know. Not knowing that. Then I went back and they said, look, this is foolishness, and I'm going to the Ministry of Education. When I got there, the incorrect forms were sent down, sir. I am saying to you that chaos reigned in this public service, because if you look at the period between 2008 and 2018, there's evidence, sir, of political involvement. Look at the time, sir, when teachers had their terms of conditions altered virtually overnight. Remember, sir, that long leave was removed without any consultation. So don't come in here and blame a government now. We had to go to court on many times, many occasions, sir. And now we're going to hear all of this about what happened and all these things that happened. Yes, they happened. But the question is when they happen. Sir, I believe that persons, I'm supporting this bill simply because it gives security to people. Persons can now go and even apply for mortgages or whatever it is, although I believe that there must be something that can be done with that too, that I believe that things will be made easier for public servants. But I'm saying to you, sir, I support it because it is all for the good and benefit of individuals in this country. And with those few words, sir, I want to thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Reverend Morris. Are there any other speakers? Senator the Honorable Linda Nurse.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm happy for those civil servants who will be, of course, the beneficiaries of these appointments. And, you know, by and large, I think we have a pretty good public service. And majority of our technical people and our other civil servants are doing a good job under the circumstances which confront them. So I think whenever there's an opportunity to get an appointment, it is good. It, of course, gives some level of security of tenure. You know, people can now go to the bank or whatever and maybe get a loan or get a mortgage because the bank now feels comfortable that they're in a secure job. And so this idea of having appointments is a good idea, but not advocating, Mr. President, necessarily that it be done as we go forward in the way that I've seen it done over the last 3 cycles. 2007, for example, 2024, and now again. We seem to be coming with this idea that you come to Parliament and you appoint whoever has been acting for the last 3 years, or well, in this case, 3 years. But the point is, Mr. President, that it is not the best way, in my view, for dealing with appointments. And as I said, I'm not critical of the people who are now going to benefit. But I think we have got to get to the stage where promotions are based on, are merit-based. The days are gone when we can look at people promotions or based on the length of time that they've been acting in a position. I know in the old days, for example, you used to have, mostly you found that it was done on a seniority basis, and you used to hear the civils, the unions speak a lot about supersession and all of that. But if we are to have as we go forward and as we try to develop our governmental services and our productivity, we need basically to be able to have persons who are obviously fit for the jobs in which they are working. So a blanket promotion of people acting cannot be the best way of dealing with this situation. We need to be ensured that people being promoted have the necessary technical skills, the qualifications. The whole process should be what happens before a person can be permanently appointed. If we don't, we continue to accommodate, for lack of a better word, some levels of mediocrity, inefficiency, which may be occurring because some of the people who benefit may not necessarily be the best persons for those appointments. And I would like to be corrected if I'm wrong on this, but what I basically would like to see is a system of performance appraisals. I don't know if this is a requirement in the civil service, and if it is actually, if it is it being done? Is every civil servant being evaluated on a regular basis to ensure that they're meeting the standards required of the particular position? And if not, what is there and what is being done to ensure that you can help them along the way, if when you do the evaluations, you find that there's some people are not up to standard. How do you help them along? How do you ensure that there's that the necessary training, retraining, or whatever is there so that people can upgrade their skills to the level that is required. You know, Mr. President, fairly recently, I believe it came to both chambers of the House where we had a situation where police constables, for example, we heard, were in some cases in that position for 20 years or in excess of 20 years. Now, you know, something has to be wrong if you are in a position for 20 years and you cannot be promoted. What is the reason? What is wrong? And I know that a position or a post was created called senior constables. Now, you know, imagine after 20 years and all you can look forward to is being promoted to a senior constable. It seems to me that something is wrong with the system, and we need to make sure that as we go forward, these technicalities are tidied up. We need to make sure that this is not really seen to be any political thing that you come in to Parliament and you appoint a whole set of people who may not, a whole set of people into permanent positions in the service. This is an administrative function. This is something that the department need to be working on and ensuring that these promotions are being done on a regular basis. I don't know what is the bottleneck. I don't know what is causing creating the problem that, you know, you have to do this level of appointments every 3 or 4 or 5 year cycle. But this is something that the department should be working on, and there should be a process where people, as I said before, there should be a process where people are evaluated on a regular basis, that their performance is being put on their file, and I bet you look to do promotions and you start to talk about promotions, you refer to how a person has been progressing. You can see that the person has been working towards getting their promotion, that they're diligent, that they're qualified, and that they have a right. They have a right, as legal people will say, probably a legitimate expectation that they will, once they're performing in a job, that they will be promoted accordingly. So I think we have to look at that, because we don't want to continue to be promoting the system based on length of time in a position, or based on seniority or something like that. So I would like to suggest that we have mandatory reviews that they be put on people's files, say maybe every 2 years, because I know in the private sector, certainly in the profession in which I work, every person from the partners right down had to have reviews done every year. And that was the basis on which you got your promotions, or you got your salary adjustments, or you got your bonus at the end of the year. You looked at all of these things. And so it was a pretty transparent and fair system when you got your promotion, or when you got your salary adjustment, or so. And, you know, we have a lot of young people who have with lots of excellent qualifications, and I don't think that they should necessarily be kept back because somebody may have been sitting in a position for 3 years, and then we come and we pass legislation which allows them to be appointed in that position. We cannot afford to allow our young people who are eager to move forward to be affected by this kind of arrangement that we have had to do in the past. And I understand that it was necessary because certain things were not being done. So all I'm suggesting, it's not an indictment of what has gone in the past. All I'm suggesting is that as we move forward, we look to a more appropriate and more transparent method of doing our promotions. I was reading sometime fairly recently some comments that Bill Gates, Mr. President, made about artificial intelligence and technology. And and I'm raising this point because he noted that as we go forward and as artificial intelligence become a more influential technologies in the workplace, that there are going to be some jobs which will completely disappear. And there are other jobs which are most likely to be at risk. He mentioned, for example, entry-level white-collar jobs, administrative positions, telesales, basic data analysis, and some coding tasks. But then, of course, on the other hand, he said, like, there are some jobs that are likely to persist. For example, in the healthcare field, education and mental health, in the creative fields, the higher level technical expertise. And I raise that because we too will become affected as time goes on by the level of technology which is being introduced. And we know that a whole government thrust and push within recent times has been to get the entire government up to speed in terms of the technology. We've had issues. I don't want to mention what we see so often happening in the licensing authority or I won't mention anymore, the Queen Elizabeth Hospital or whatever. We do have issues, but the point is that government is obviously trying to ensure that the level of technology within the system is being utilized so that governments becomes more efficient. And so I mentioned this in the context that we have got to see that we are planning as we go forward to be able to make the adjustments for those jobs that we are likely to disappear, but at the same time, making sure that the planning for those jobs which are likely to persist. And in the nursing field, for example, I believe we still use a number of nurses from Nigeria, I believe it is, or Ghana. And so we have got to look at how the level of training is in terms of making sure that we have the numbers of people in these new areas that will evolve and those that will persist to be able to continue to work efficiently. And I raised the one specifically about nurses because I know that government, we just last week, I think it was, passed a law in this Senate and in the other place for loans for the building of an extension to the QAs. That will need money. That will need lots of HR resources. And so we got to look and to think how we can get our nurses up to scratch and get enough trade to be able to take on those roles when they become available in the next few years. So as I said, Mr. President, I am happy for those who will be appointed. I hope that as we move forward, that we don't have to do this cycle over and over, but that we can have in place the proper system for evaluations and for promotions, which are more merit-based. And I would just like to wish all of those who will be promoted well and trust that they will continue to strive to do even more and to be even more high, look at other promotions. And I think by this method of promotions, you create a more competitive system, which will only redound to the benefit of the service and its performance. And with those few words, Mr. President, I would like to.
Thank you very much, Senator Nurse. Senator Nichols.
Mr. President, thank you for this opportunity to speak towards this bill. I'm grateful for the opportunity to do so. Mr. President, I've had the opportunity in my professional career to work closely with the trade unions who represent the public sector in having to deal with working through the challenges they face with the government over the years. And I think it is important to set the record as to why this legislation has had to be passed, how it has been amended throughout the years, and why it is necessary to preserve the dignity of those persons in the public sector who are required to work in offices for many periods of time. So I've had the opportunity to engage with persons who have been acting in positions for over 20 years, some 30 years, in spite of the fact that the original legislation was passed in 2007. Some of those matters are now before the court, so obviously, because they're sub judice, I can't go into any details. That is obviously a reflection of how long it takes for the judges to give decisions, but I will say more about that in another place at another time. Sir, this legislation was passed in 2007, and I believe it was the last parliamentary debate that I participated in when I was in the Senate, between 2003 and 2007. The Democratic Labour Party walked out of the House, the other place, didn't participate in the debate. In fact, the then leader of the opposition, who subsequently became Prime Minister, told the Speaker that he would never have the opportunity to rule against me again. They came here and voted it down. Elections was called, and people made a choice. But the provisions of the Act which were wrongly criticized still stand. The 2010 amendments to the Public Service Act are merely cosmetic changes, removing the word post and changing it with office. And one or two other minor amendments, but by 2010, the fundamental ethos of that legislation had not changed. What it provided was that there should be no post or office in the public service that should be vacant for more than 1 year. That is still in law. And what we have is a situation where, Mr. President, that the public service has not been able to fill vacant posts within the time contemplated within the legislation. And therefore, you've had people having to act for in excess of what the law requires. So that when I hear the concern that we might be appointing people, and that might cause some confusion in people's minds, is it fair for somebody to go to work every day, do their job for 3 years, and still have the contingency of having to revert to their substantive position when that position is filled? How can we run a system where we are not ameliorating those considerations of people? The government is doing the right thing. So by 2020, we had to make the adjustment again, because between 2007 and 2020, people were acting again. And what the public sector unions
and those unions representing all the public service workers were contending prior to 2007 became a problem again. We have had people who were on study leave when the 2007 amendment was passed, and the Public Service Administration told them that they were not entitled to the appointment, even although they had 10 years acting prior to going on study leave, because the law said you had to be in the post 3 years prior to the act, and study leave does not. Study leave does not entitle you to an appointment. So those persons were unfair. And some of the 400 persons that Senator Dr. Moronic spoke to who appealed to the Governor General are those persons who had to bring those extenuating circumstances. So that provision in the Act, which also was wrongly criticized, has been used by our head of state to make good in people's lives. And the reason why that is so, Mr. President, is because we have adopted within our constitutional structure the peculiar framework where public officers are appointed by the head of the state on the advice of the Service Commission. That is to insulate them from the interference from the political class. But what that has also done was to create a system which we have to guard against its being misused. Not by the politicians, because they can't directly touch the people, and they will come to instances where they have circumvented that, but to ensure that those systems are protected. So that is why it's necessary to clothe this amendment to the Public Service Act within the context of the Constitution, because we know that there have been actions and urgings to interfere with public officers every time there's economic turmoil, particularly under the Democratic Labour Party. Because you remember, Mr. President, that by 2008, not 2008, that the 8% pay cut in the early 1990s was inflicted on public officers because the government had run out of cash. You remember that in about 2012, 2013, 2014, when the Minister of Finance, then Christopher Sinclair, the Honorable Christopher Sinclair, in his what I termed the water cut budget, when he said, why you cut? And asked the Barbados Labour Party to join with the government in a constitutional amendment to remove the protection that the Barbados Labour Party put in place to ensure that public service salaries are never troubled again. You had to cloak that within the garb of the Constitution to ensure that public sector workers are not pawns every time there is economic turmoil, particularly when we are under the Democratic Labour Party reign. Mr. President, you will remember that when that 8% pay cut was paid back, the Democratic Labour Party said that it should be paid in one tranche and not three. They fought all the way up to the Privy Council on that. And that is why this debate is necessary, and that is why we have to alter the Constitution, not amend the text, but to bring it within the constitutional framework to ensure that anytime a parliament wants to go against the public officers, they have to secure the majority of most of the members of parliament, put your names on the record if you're going after the people. That is why this debate is being cloaked in this way, and that is why this is necessary, Mr. President. And I think I need to make these points. Sir, very quickly, our courts will have to decide whether a public officer who is appointed to act in a temporary post on the advice, by the head of state, the president, on the advice of the Service Commission, can be summarily dismissed by a minister. Now, I heard Senator Worrell speaking about politicians interfering, but he was in this chamber when in 2013, December 2013, when the Minister of Finance, Christopher Sinclair, gave a ministerial statement on the government fiscal consolidation program, the aim of which was to reduce the public service by 3,000 people between January 2012 to March 2014. All of the temporary people who were in the public service, 3,000 of them were sent home, including people who had been acting in temporary appointments for in excess of the 3 years. So the act was passed in 2007, but there were a whole set of people who were acting
since 2007, and some even before, that were forgotten. That the public service system, sir, although they complain and make their grievances known to the Governor General, the public service system was not able to accommodate those grievances in time to ameliorate those people's circumstances. They were caught up in the 3,000 that was sent home by the Democratic Labour Party. And the point I want to make was that we've had a ruling in the High Court that the minister can give an instruction to fire people because they were temporary in the public service. That is being challenged in the courts. And the reason why it's still before the courts, I have a view that if that was dealt with in an expeditious manner, a lot of those people will be back working. But it got dragged through the system from 2012. All it know in the Court of Appeal. That is one of the things that happens to real people. I'm sorry, it would be remiss of me if I were not to come here to speak to these things. Because we pass these amendments, we pass these laws, and we say, well, the government only coming to make sure that the election coming. Sir, the Democratic Labour Party never sought to address the backlog of temporary people in the 10 years that they were in government. We passed the original act, which they criticized. They never changed it. And we have come in 2020 and now in 2025 to make good on it. You cannot have public workers working every day, discharging their functions, living in a state of permanent contingency. We live in a society that should strive to be a good society. We live in a society where we should try to make lives better for our people. How can you motivate yourself to go to work, doing it every day, hoping that you will be recognized for your work, but having to live with the sector of being sent back to your substantive position, notwithstanding you trying your best? It can't happen in the private sector. Why should we condone it in the public sector? Mr. President, one of the things that I also want to raise here, sir, the docking of teachers' pay was part of that fiscal consolidation exercise. Teachers accumulate terms leave based on their terms of service. 10 years, I believe, you teach, you're entitled to 1 terms leave with pay.
It's 15.
It's 15 now? It's now 15. But, sir, the unions, at the time, one of them was led by one of the candidates for the Democratic Labour Party, sat down and allowed the Democratic Labour Party administration to take it away. And they came sheepishly to me. And we went to court on the teachers' behalf and got a ruling in their favor. That took several years to come through the court system. But it was started certainly before 2018. Meandering through the court system. You can tell yourself why. But service changed in 2018. You had a situation where teachers' unions, from the time we were going to school, you know that when there was a meeting at the teachers' unions, the school went into a different mode. A skeleton staff remained, the teachers went to the meeting. Their pay was docked on an order of a minister. But the minister cannot institute disciplinary action against public officers. And even if you institute disciplinary action, you have to charge them and give them a hearing. There was no due process. But a judge told me when I went for an injunction that if the government wrong, it would pay, so they're not granting the injunction, damages will be an adequate remedy. So you breach the constitutional right of public officers in this country, and the judge look at me and tell me, Mr. Nichols, if the government is wrong, the government will pay. So the government had to pay. Both unions. These things have to be told. Because you will hear the argument, the government amend the Constitution, on Monday they come back on Friday and amend it. And again, I will say, Mr. President, you have to alter the Constitution when it is necessary. Constitutional reform is not the only occasion which requires you to alter the Constitution. These things are necessary and are reasonable and are prudent. And I want to remind the public of these things because we are not always going to be a government forever. That's a fact. But while we are here, we are going to do the right things that will stand the test of time, like the 2007 Public Service Act and the consequent amendments. Mr. President, with those few words, I'm obliged to.
Thank you very much, Senator Nichols. Senator Honorable Christopher Maynard.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I assembled all these documents, and Senator Nichols has got up and said everything. But, sir, history has a way of repeating itself, and Senator Nichols admitted to something that I noticed when I read of the list of bills debated and passed in 2007, that indeed the Public Service Act was one of the last things that came to Parliament in that session. And I hope, Mr. President, that history will not repeat itself. Mr. President, I couldn't help but notice when I started to read this particular bill, I had this strange sense of the deja vu. And I thought, I was a little bit sleepy, and I thought, am I just not saying these things right? I took off my glasses and I cleaned them. And then I realized that today's bill is not at all dissimilar to a bill of 2020. So I agree with Senator Nichols, in fact, that we are doing the same thing over and over and over. But I think that with reasonable cause, Senator Nurse mentioned that, I think Senator Worrell also, some of the inefficiencies in the hospital relate to staffing issues. I can't speak to the exact numbers, but there are inefficiencies that are related to staffing issues. And some of it is created because people were not being appointed with the speed that they probably should be. But this government, sir, was under a serious IMF program until recently. And I think that one has to be prudent in terms of how one behaves when one is doing certain things. So it does not surprise me that on the eve of whatever is to happen, and before Christmas, government will wish to appoint all those who have been waiting. But I do not believe, sir, that appointments en masse is necessarily a good thing. In the QEH, there was a system of review and appraisal introduced probably almost a decade ago, where persons, and well, I know I can speak to all the medical staff, had to have an appraisal done. I cannot tell you that the reviews and the people getting new contracts necessarily followed the outcomes of the reviews. But I thought it was an effort for dialogue, for people to point out people's deficiencies, and according to the rules and in terms of conditions of service, you're supposed to come up with a workable system for addressing each of the deficiencies identified and have it rectified. Now, our nurses continue to migrate, and we are forced to seek nursing services from other parts of the world. That's part of a normal cycle in the world at present. It's not unique to Barbados. So increasingly, we are seeking nursing expertise from overseas. And these persons are contracted into these jobs. And in time, they move on. The world is in a cycle now, again, of further recruitment. So the nurses who have been here and have been serving exceptionally well will move on to figuratively greener pastures. And we will have a new cycle. What will be interesting to see, sir, is whether the government's new appointments, whether our own Barbadian migration will stall. I'm not wishing for it to stop, because I believe that people should be allowed to seek the highest professional achievement wherever they can. So I do not wish to stall the movement of our nurses. And sir, I hope that with these new appointments, and I also hope in a major way, and hope is not a pun, that the HOPE project and nurses who would not have qualified will now qualify, and they can have stability by the possibility of owning their own home. But it will not stop there. It is one thing to appoint persons to posts, but if you do not make the conditions of service comfortable, they will still leave. So being appointed does not bind you to the country, because when the recruiter comes and you're offered housing, medical insurance, school fees for your children, and all the things that you would wish, people will still go. But sir, there are small things that a government can do that makes it more comfortable for those who remain. And you may stop some of the movement. For many, many years, sir, certainly on my part, for the last 7+ years, I have been pleading in this parliament, sir, for this government, and I have to say this government because I wasn't here in the last government, to at least consider what things can be done in the hospital that will make the lives of our nurses and doctors too, and all the other staff more comfortable. Like a creche in the hospital, like a gym. And more recently, sir, like the ability to get some food in the hospital at night, or during the day, or eat lunch, or have Senator Cummings come up to the hospital for lunch in the refurbished cafeteria, sir. Because there's none. I am sure, sir, that with Dr. Senator Connell's concerns about chronic non-communicable diseases, he can probably confirm, if the records were available, that the most frequent stop for Kentucky delivery is at the QEH. And that's because no one has seen it fit, sir, to fix the cafeteria which the people, the public servants, depend on. It has been closed for almost 2 years. Think about that. 2,000+ people working in a 24-hour institution cannot get food. It's a disgrace. There's nothing short of a disgrace. Yes, we'll be eating at home on Christmas Day, but those who work in the hospital had better bring some food with them. And that is a state of play. No one has fixed it. It is not good. So you will have a guaranteed salary and a job, but when you come to work, you are still at square one. Sir, so I plead with those in charge, consider it a New Year gift and fix the cafeteria in the QEH. And sir, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Nurse. Senator Dr. Connell.
Mr. President, I rise to largely support the bill and perhaps to confirm what my colleague has said, that the #1 delivery service to the hospital, unfortunately, is not NCD friendly. In fact, I am told they have a QEH special going on. So the terms and conditions of service need to be improved. Every year, it annoys me because every year there's another example of a colleague who has trained, and for which this country has invested in either at the primary, secondary, or many of them are Barbados scholars, or they've gone off on national development scholarships, so has invested heavily in their training. And they're returning back to give service to this country. And let us make no mistake, that service is not because of salary. It's usually because they want to give back, or they just have an allergy to maybe colder weather. It is frustrating and annoying to see the delays in recruitment. Many times people get frustrated and say, you know what, I want warm weather, but clearly I can't return home. I'm going to go to another Caribbean country. And there's a clear example of this that I'm speaking about happening just now, where a colleague who was trained in Barbados, primary, secondary school, not St. John, but still secondary school, and went off, did her postgraduate training here at the hospital initially, went off to Canada, did specialist training, did subspecialist training, and was then told, you must return to your substantive post that you left in study leave, to be supervised by some might argue someone who is not even as qualified in that area as that person. So it makes no sense. And of course, has since decided to go other places. This is a waste of the taxpayers' money. You know, we have invested in these individuals. Let me also say there's no long list of people in many specialist areas, as well as in some specialist nurses who are lining up to apply to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. That just does not occur. People are looking for a better life, and sometimes they feel that the salary offered that would not afford them that. So that's something that we need to consider. So my area of specialty in education is assessment, and it always really disturbs me how the key performance indicators of many employees are not properly assessed. In another place, I made the comment that, we shouldn't be just renewing contracts every 3 years. If you don't, I think the North has it right, not North as in St. Lucie, but further north. If you don't meet a certain standard by a number of years, you're out of the system, the so-called publish or perish. But in our system, it is possible to continue ad infinitum until 20 years later, you get a minor promotion, and you feel somewhat happy that you've been at least promoted. But what does that say about the system? You're blocking a post that someone who could be more productive could easily have been in. Quite often, when I have asked in other settings, when people are complaining about how you can promote this individual, when they're the worst person to work with, or the output is low, or they have another job besides their public service job, there's nothing on record to reflect it. Nothing. And even some of the same people who are complaining and say, I can personally say 1, 2, 3, they don't want to put their record on record. So it is a challenge. And so I agree with my fellow independent senators in stating that there needs to be a system of performance appraisal done on a regular basis, annually or biannually, where it's developmental to the individual and people kind of expect. I'm not going to use legal terms, although I think I will borrow. There's a legitimate expectation that after a certain amount of time, if you're meeting your KPIs, you will be promoted. And that should be expected. The danger of a bill like this, of course, although I'm not sure this was the intention, is that there may always be a few people who may not have met those standards, but who will qualify, because again, they don't meet any of the ineligibility criteria, and therefore they would qualify. So although I would largely support the bill, I would caution that it needs to come along with performance indicators, and that managers need to be held accountable to carrying out these annual reviews of their staff. If that's not done, then the public service will always remain at one level, and we will continue to renew people's contracts or extend them or appoint them after X number of times. I also want to put a plea, not only for a cafeteria for the holidays, but I also want to put a plea. There is too much investment in the training of healthcare professionals for us not to expedite their return. When Bajans go overseas and study, whether it's nurses, doctors, physiotherapists, pharmacists, whatever, and they return home, this needs to be somehow fast-tracked. We are losing too many professionals every single year. And the thing is that happens is that they're then offered positions by their employers in those countries. Maybe not so as much now in North America, but in the past, right? We cannot afford to lose this. Now, yes, telemedicine allows us to still benefit from their specialty care, but think about the investment loss. With that brief intervention, I will close here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Connell. Senator Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. At this time, I beg to move that this sitting of the Senate be suspended for lunch until 3 p.m. this afternoon.
The question is that this sitting be suspended until 3 p.m. today. Those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it. This sitting is therefore suspended until 3 p.m. today.